Well, good morning, everyone, and sorry I didn't do a vlog yesterday. I was really busy. We had a pretty big snowstorm come through, and this morning I was dealing with the remains of that. Well, looks like I'm gonna have to make another pass at getting out. All right, two's a charm, and I'm out on the street. You know, it's interesting. A couple years back, I ran for Columbus City Council, and one of the things that we talked about was strategies for snow removal on the thousands and thousands of miles of side streets in the city. And you know, the city approach seems reasonable. They have you know, they're going to focus on the arterials, you know, the interstates and the state routes and the major thoroughfares, and that's really what I would expect from the government, because you know, they have political pressure to serve the most people. But there are a lot of people who, you know, just really can't easily get to those streets, and it's, you know, like in my case, luckily I had a snowplow driver who was willing to yield, but which he didn't have to, but traffic was backed up ahead of him, so he made it easy for me. But I see a lot of people who are having trouble getting around in the snow, and there's really no plan for side streets other than, like, the city's plan is really not to touch them until they're happy with the way everything else is. And that wouldn't be so bad if there weren't also a plan to have, you know, some kind of secondary, you know, kind of a secondary plan to have the snow removed. Possibly, you know, I imagine in an extreme emergency they might ask residents to hand shovel or something like that. I've never seen that happen, but I have seen it go on for a cold spell where the snow just kept, storms kept piling it on and it just wasn't melting. I've seen, you know, very deep snow. I mean, the side streets were impassable, and they're not quite to that point now. They're just really icy, and then of course the plows are really piling it up at the end of the street, which is why it became, you know, tricky for me to get out this morning. So anyway, the city has no real plan. I proposed a plan to essentially have a snow bounty. So essentially the city would you know, pay private contractors to remove the snow once it reached a certain depth, or had been on the ground for long enough that it was causing treacherous conditions. You know, there are a lot of details that could be worked out in such a system, but I think it's nice because the nature of the plan, it would have pressed private snowplows into service. And one of the things I see pretty commonly is we'll get a decent sized snow event like this, and all the businesses, their parking lots will be plowed within 24 hours. Like, and if we get a little bit of snow, it'll be completely, like, you know, there will be no snow. It's salted, snow is pushed away. So there really isn't a lot for those guys to do after a major snow event. So you end up with this, you know, situation that is typical in statism, where you have a ton of resources that are not being allocated efficiently, as evidenced by a bunch of unplowed streets and a bunch of snowplows just driving around with their plows up. And I think that, you know, one of the things that if we had a completely free market system, the market would match up those streets to those plow truck drivers. And, you know, I think ultimately probably an electronic system where residents can pool their resources to pay. I mean, essentially what the government promises is that you are pooling your resources with your neighbors, and then when you need a street plowed or something, then those resources are allocated to do that. And that's the promise of government. And but the state usurps that promise and pretends to be a government, but ultimately compels people to fund its projects by force. So while most would agree, I think all would agree that it's good to pool resources to do snow removal to make travel safe. The state also does a bunch of other things with the money that people don't agree with. And beyond disagreement, there are things that the state shouldn't be doing because no one should be doing them. So, I mean, we had a situation, I mean, we have all kinds of situations of waste in my city, and I'm not running for office or anything, but I just think that it's just absurd that the populace in general, I mean, it keeps coming up as an election issue in city council races. How are you going to deal with the side streets and the snow on the side streets? And their answer repeatedly is, we will do nothing. And I just think we'd be better off with a system where area residents can, you know, pool together with other people on their street and say, and bid and say, you know what, I would chip in $20 to have a pro come in and clean this street for us, so we don't have people breaking their, you know, legs and stuff like that, walking around, trying to shovel snow, having heart attacks, all this kind of stuff. My street has a lot of elderly people on it. You know, I'm a busy dad. I don't have time to shovel everyone else's driveway. Now, one thing that's really interesting too is that I have a lot of, well, I mean, I would describe their political philosophy as socialist, in that they believe that we should all come together and work through adversity together. That's what they're constantly preaching, as long as their neck isn't on the line, as long as it's someone else doing it for them. And a really good example is a snowstorm. I mean, just think through the year of all the people who said that we all need to band together to do X or Y or Z that they personally benefit from. I saw someone, a tweet this morning from someone who was advocating the continuation of S-chip. And then at the bottom of the opinion article that my city government retweeted, it was a it had a disclaimer. It said, this person owns a business that you know, caters entirely, a nonprofit that caters entirely to S-chip, you know, patients and stuff like that. It's like, well, yeah, of course they want to see S-chip continue, but there are some people who actually look into S-chip and they find that it funds through force. I mean, if you don't pay your taxes to fund it, cops will show up and they will put the pain on you. It funds through force a lot of people who have very high incomes and could afford insurance through other means. So, I mean, I just think that when it comes to charity services like healthcare for children, I mean, first of all, I mean, if I were a part of the medical community, the healthcare community, I would expect there to be a charity, and there are many charities that are along these lines, that provide healthcare to children who need it. A really good example is St. Jude's Children's Hospital. They go and they fund, you know, they take kids that have very expensive, life-threatening illnesses, and then they, through donations from the public, they go and they give free healthcare to them. And I think that, you know, the argument for things like S-chip are that we have discovered that healthcare is cheaper overall for people, and they live longer, happier, more productive lives if they get routine healthcare. And so in order to do that, it helps if people have insurance, so that whenever they get sick or they get an ailment, there isn't this concern. I mean, there still is for people who have insurance. I mean, I have insurance, and, you know, there's a question of whether or not to go to the ER for something or not, versus an urgent care, or versus, you know, calling into the doctor's office. I mean, what we typically do is we call into the doctor's office and explain the situation, if it's non-emergent, and then we, I mean, well, there's the thing too, is it's like, obviously if it's a really bad emergency, you call the squad, and then they take you to the ER. But there are a lot more things on the borderline where I just like to consult with my physician. Well, a lot of people don't have a regular physician. And so knowing that these things are increasingly important to great healthcare for people, then the medical community, who knows this supposedly better than anyone else, should be stepping up and creating charities that, you know, facilitate these needs, and then work to educate the public on why it's so important to have these kinds of services available. Instead, they just ask politicians to steal money for them. I mean, not the medical community, but, you know, the people who want these services. And so you end up with a thing where, yeah, they're doing something, you know, that is good. You know, helping sick children is a good thing, but robbing people to do it is not a good thing. And so it negates the goodness. It doesn't matter. You know, there's no exclusion for, well, I was robbing the bank to cure sick children. You know, that's not how it works. You're not allowed to threaten to kill and harm people just because you have some idea for something that you think would be helpful. And that's the thing, is a lot of these programs, they're helpful in theory, but in the long run, the economics don't end up working out. Another thing that is a really big problem, and this is something that anyone who hates Donald Trump should really think about, is that they've spent a lot of, you know, many of them have spent the past 8 years trying to tie as much as possible to the state and the decisions of the state. And now someone they don't like is in power, and all they do is complain. But they don't argue, maybe we should consider having these core functions that are so critical and life impacting. You know, people will die if they don't have it. That's what you always hear. Well, those things should not be politicized. And you can tell whether or not anyone is serious about it, or whether or not they're going after, you know, some kind of political self-interest, whether or not they acknowledge that fact. If something is of life-threatening importance, you don't want a bunch of politicians controlling it. And the world is full of examples of places where that's exactly how things are on a day-to-day basis. You've got dictators that have tied the necessities of life to political obedience and support, and if you don't support them because they're doing a terrible job, then they deny government services to you. And this wouldn't be a problem if people didn't get their services from the government in the first place. So, I mean, the most sure path to freedom is to not rely on politicians to provide everything for you, because then you don't really have to care about politics. The only reason you care about politics is to keep them from stealing more, and to keep the people in the pig pen from you know, getting in fights over who gets to eat the best slop. You know, that's personally how I see political discourse right now, is you've got a bunch of people who are angry because the new farmer is not who they like, and they're arguing over, you know, they're fighting each other and squealing incessantly about scraps. And they really should argue to have all of their money spent by someone other than the farmer. And I just don't understand. I mean, I think part of the problem is that people were raised in an environment where that's normal, and so they just don't really give it a second thought. It's what they've always known. They don't think of what could be, and they don't think about the nature of the situation and what it really is. They also don't think about the overhead. The state has just lots and lots of bureaucracy, and that all has to be paid for. And most of the bureaucrats that I've known and worked with, I mean, I actually had a contract where I worked for the state of Ohio for the legislature, and I was amazed at how incompetent the people were. And I even asked the director, I said, well, what's your experience? Well, his experience amounted to having political connections. He didn't really have significant technical experience to lead the technical arm of the state legislature. And, you know, this is one of the reasons why, you know, as we enter a technical age, you're not going to find these solutions coming from the state. Most of these people, they only take an interest in technology when they're afraid that it threatens the status quo, and it threatens their ability to continue to dominate and monopolize people, and only provide services. A really great example would be Uber. Taxi cabs taxi cab companies had worked with the state for many years to ensure, to build up all kinds of regulations against driving other people around in a car. Now, this is something anyone may do. We do it all with our friends and with our family members. So this would indicate that everyone is competent to do so. And if they're not competent to do so, I would argue they shouldn't have a driver's license. But I don't really, I think that driver's licensure is really just a tax. It doesn't actually prevent bad drivers from being on the road. So I just think they should be prevented from driving, which is really hard because, people will loan people a car. And no, I wouldn't loan a bad driver a car, but it happens all the time, and then people steal them. So I just think that these situations are avoidable by simply looking for other ways to deal with the situation. Like Uber, they said, well, why don't we just take private drivers who have some spare time, or a lot of spare time, due to unemployment or other factors, and then we will help deal technologically with some of the issues that regulation was meant to protect against, like background checks on the drivers, helping them navigate a complex city, dealing with payment systems and fairness. Also, the problem of deciding how many taxi cabs to have in a given area. I mean, there are times when it's hard to hail a cab because there are none in the area because it's so busy. So, and Uber has dealt with each of these in a technological way, and they have a competition in Lyft, which is nice because it helps ensure that if people don't like Uber, they have an alternative. And I would like to see even more competition in that space as time goes by. I'd also like to see it widened out to other areas. I think we need this kind of alternative to state controls for more and more things. A really good example would be the Postal Service. I mean, I think that we have a lot of people traveling from place to place, even long distances, and it would be possible to match, to essentially allow people to work as a package or letter delivery person, to allow them to do this and give them background checks and have tracking through the app and everything like this, and actually have faster and cheaper service, because you could take advantage once again of the unused transportation resources that are in our society. I mean, we have a thing. There's a ride-sharing program, but in my city, but it's not really. It's something where you kind of plan weeks in advance. It's not weeks in advance. It's not something where you just get in your car and it's like, all right, what non-felons, non-sex offenders want a ride to work with me in the morning, and then you can also, you can have the various drivers and passengers rate, their enjoyment at riding with the person. I mean, I hope you would rate me well, seeing as you're choosing to ride with me this morning. But yeah, I just think it's really, I think there are so many areas right now where we have tremendous inefficiency in our society, and the state maintains a monopoly in an inefficient mechanism with a lot of union government workers that want to see the system continue, for example, the Postal Service. But it's a huge money hog, and it's not that we have ideal, or we would ever get ideal alternatives. It's not that we have ideal alternatives now, but we do have alternatives, and I think the more resources that were freed up from being forced to pay for the inferior service would give us opportunities to explore superior services. That's one of the things I've thought about a lot as well, is, a lot of people are going to Amazon, which has done a good job of taking a traditional warehousing direct-to-consumer model, kind of like the Sears catalog, except with, computers helping to make some of the processes more efficient. But I think about it as like, they're still building all of these Amazon warehouses all around the country, and they are still using shipping companies to deliver all these packages. And I really don't think that's where the future is going to take us. I think in the future we're going to have services where where any business who wants to sell anything is going to have a computerized inventory system that they take very seriously. So they're going to be doing, they're probably going to have the stock laid out in a way that it makes it easier to control inventory, so things don't get misplaced and lost, so that they know everything they have at any given time. And then you will, as a customer, will be able to search this. Now currently it's kind of a manual process. If businesses have a lot of product they want to put on someplace like Amazon, you know, there are ways to automate that a little bit better. But you know, I think that eventually you're going to have a system where every business, from a small mom and pop shop to you know, Walmart and everything, they're all going to have all their product that is on the shelves on stock, and you're really not going to search so much. Like, the first results are not going to be things that are out of stock or that aren't in your area. You're going to be able to search from things in your neighborhood and by distance. I mean, you'll just be able to browse, like, oh, I need a snow shovel. Well, what snow shovels are available, you know, near me? What snow shovels are available, you know, a 15-minute walk away? You know, not that you'd want to walk through a ton of snow, but hopefully you'd go and plan ahead and get your shovel before it snowed. But right now, it's very difficult. You have to call all these small places on the phone. They might be busy. They don't really want to talk to you about a maybe. I found that Facebook has helped a lot. A lot of small businesses are on Facebook. So now, rather than call them when I have a question, I just send them a message on Facebook, and they either get back to me or they don't. And I find that I go and buy the product often from people who, you know, who respond to their Facebook messages. So I think that should be encouraged. But ultimately, I mean, you need to be able to find out what kind of, you know, you need to know what kind of businesses have snow shovels in stock, usually hardware stores, but maybe grocery stores and other things as well. And then you need to be able to reach them and get an answer as to the exact model numbers and the price. So then, once you find these products, you can go and order them. And we already have, it's weird to me how long it's taking local delivery services to take off. I mean, we're still going on a model where we have a giant distribution center, like, yeah, there's a giant UPS sorting facility south of town. And so, you know, if I want to send something to someone in town, it may get sent down there and go up. And they've improved the efficiency, so it's possible to send an item through all these distribution centers in less than 24 hours anywhere in the world, and that's incredible. But it also takes 24 hours to send it to my next door neighbor, and that is a problem. It's also very expensive. I don't think it's as expensive, but it's very expensive to send a next day package down the street. So, and there's another option, is it could be that retailers could agree amongst themselves to track, you know, all of this product that they have, and then like Amazon might have the product in their distribution center, but then Amazon might know that it exists in a shop down the street, and they might be able to pay that vendor, you know, because the vendor, they've got it on the shelves and they don't have an interested buyer. Amazon has an interested buyer, and they want, and so they've already made the sale, and so their job is at that point just fulfilling it, and they don't really care how it gets fulfilled. They just want to complete the transaction so they get to keep their money. So it's really interesting to me. Like, I could foresee a time when Amazon sells me a product and they promise 2-day shipping, but then in the background they notice that a shop down the street has it. They call them up, probably through a computer, not via an actual telephone call, and then they say, hey, you've got this product just sitting, you know, gathering dust on your shelf. We've already sold it. We'll ship our version of the product to the guy, but if you don't want it on your shelf and you want the money in hand instead, then why don't you just drop it off with the guy? And then the store owner will be like, it'll be like ordering a pizza. And, you know, that's another thing I don't understand, is when I order products through my local mom and pop shop, which I sometimes do, they are in absolutely no hurry. Like I've said, I want to buy this, and so they have a sale if only they can deliver on it. But they don't seem to care. They just write it down with pencil and paper, and they're like, well, I'll put this in when we do our daily order, and then it takes like 3 days or whatever to do it. I mean, all these people are talking about, oh, we have to patronize the small mom and pop shop, but their service is terrible. They don't buy stuff. Like, if I want, I mean, a lot of times I'm willing to pay more. I'll just go to Amazon, write it down. I'll have it a day earlier. I'll be able to look at all the product without actually going to the store and having to filter through piles of stuff that I don't really want. I mean, they're just always, I don't know, it's very frustrating. So, well, let's see. This should be interesting. They don't seem to like to plow my parking lot at work, so hopefully I won't get stuck here. But, yeah, I just think that, oh, and interestingly, you know, this is a case where, I mean, they have plowed, which is a surprise to me. I've been working from home this week, but, I mean, just because it's private doesn't mean it's going to be good enough. I mean, I'm not really a fan of the amount of the way they do snow removal, but that's between me and my employer. I voluntarily work at an employer that apparently doesn't really see snow removal as a priority. So my choice there is that I could go work somewhere else if that is more important to me than other factors. So, you know, I'm not saying it's all just wonderful stuff, but you know, I'm not in a gulag or anything. I can go work anywhere I want if this starts to bother me. So anyway, I'm gonna wrap it up. It's I had to shovel some snow before I left for work, and now it's 9 o'clock, so not getting here when I wanted to, but if I were telecommuting, I'd be at work all night. I'd have a half-hour work in today already if I were telecommuting, and there's no reason I can't. So anyway, yeah, just wanted to talk a little bit, I guess. I wasn't really sure. I actually wanted to talk about some other things, but I kind of got railing on, you know, ultimately how I think that the state will be undermined, and some of, in the amazing Amazon world we live in, where you can have any product on Amazon in 2 days, very reliably, and great customer service. I just think there's so much room technologically there are so many different ways that we're going to see the free market deliver on that, literally. And I'm really excited to see that. I think that possibly within the next 2 to 5 years, we'll probably see cheaper shipping because it's handled by extremely local carriers. Those people would also probably provide services to pizza delivery companies to help fill in their, you know, to help keep their schedule busy, to keep them out driving around. And I even see this as an opportunity for pizza delivery companies. I mean, they already have a fleet of cars. They're already out driving around the neighborhoods. They could just have a little blip pop up on their computer, is like, hey, when you get done delivering that pizza, go here and get this product, and then come back and get more pizza, and then go out and get, you know, deliver pizza in that neighborhood, and then stop by and drop off that guy's product. And they could charge a small delivery charge to the shipping company or whatever. And, you know, if people know that it's the pizza delivery company is already coming to their house, they might even be able to sell more pizza. So anyway, that's enough free ideas for how to become a billionaire. I'm going to go back to fixing SQL reports. So I'll see you tomorrow.